Welcome to Kajeet's fall webinar on digital equity and the digital divide. I'm happy to have the audience with us today. It's a topic that is very important to Kajeet and is in fact the motivation behind what we do at Kajeet when we work with schools and school districts across the country. And we're going to be talking about the issue of the digital divides, or as we think of it, plural digital divides, because there are several different areas we're going to touch on. Go through some data behind those numbers, and also talk about how you can assess this within school or within your school district. And we'll also talk about the component of these digital divides that Kajeet addresses, and we address that. We'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A. If you have questions as we go through, please just feel free to enter those into the chat so that we can capture them, and then we'll make sure we address any of those during the Q&A. I want to start off by defining what we mean by the digital divides. And really three major areas that we think of when we think of the digital divide. One is actual access to computing devices for students, commonly referred to as device equity. And that I've got here is from the Project Tomorrow National Speak Up Survey, which is one of the largest surveys of students, parents, and educators conducted each year, and the findings of which are presented to Congress every year as well. And at some of this data, you'll see that sixth grade, so during school, 30% of students lack access to a tablet or laptop. And what we're talking about is they lack access to one of these devices even outside of school. So even just within their family, they have access to this type of a device. Grade 12, by the senior year of high school, you can see that gap has dropped, yet still there are 27% of students who lack access to a tablet or laptop even senior year of high school. So it's a pretty significant gap when you think of the national drive towards increased online resources and one-to-one. Stories in the news that focus on the deployment of one-to-one, and sometimes, if you're following education media, you may think, wow, this is happening everywhere. But in fact, over 70% of students still have no school-provided personal computing device. So while you see schools deploying devices out to students, there's a large number, and the vast majority of students out there who still are not getting a personal computing device from school. Something that we've seen as we've worked with schools and districts across the country ourselves, which is that we encounter a lot of multi-child families. So this a family has more than one student in their K-12 system, but often these families only have a single computing device in the home. So the students really need to share that resource, both the device and the internet access, to complete any sort of homework assignments, do their research, communicate with their peers, etc. That can be very challenging. As school leaders, as well as PTS organizations, we've heard from parents that they often are unable to students through their assignments and work in this single device. Between the time that the students get home, which can be late in the afternoon, especially if they have extracurricular activities or jobs, or if parents work and the students don't come directly home, have a family dinner in the evening, and then getting that work done before bedtime, and up to 2, 3, or even 4 students in a household, it can be very hard to share a single computing device. This is, of course, one of the drivers behind the move towards one-to-one, where every student will have their own device. When we talk about device equity, I want to touch on compatibility and capability of devices. For a long time, we were focused on deploying desktops or laptops into families or in classrooms, and became accustomed to the refresh cycle of one of those types of devices. And I want to note that as we've moved to more mobile devices, smartphones and tablets, there really faster refresh cycle, and this is evidenced, for example, in the operating systems themselves. So in the past 6 years, there are 7 major versions of iOS and major versions of Android. By comparison, there have only been 4 versions of Windows in that same time period. So you see that the refresh of operating systems and the device hardware that goes along with those is very frequent. This can lead to issues where new applications or new content that's put out as apps on these devices can be incompatible with devices that are not up to date on the latest operating system. And that's especially true in the Android environment. So one of the caveats to that is to rely on website-based resources. So if everything is web-based and we use a common web browser platform to access our online resources, that's the way with the operating system-specific app compatibility issues. I do want to note that the move to web-based resources has presented some of its own challenges, especially when looking at the different screen sizes on different devices. So taking a website from a 10 or a 14-inch tablet or laptop computer screen down to a 7-inch tablet or even a 5 or a 4-inch smartphone screen can present its own set of problems and can render those specific sites unusable on those smaller platforms. The next area of the digital divide that I want to talk about is access to broadband, so generally referred to as access equity. Thinking about the ability of students to really get online and do their research, do homework assignments that might involve online resources, or access all of the supplementary resources or electronic textbooks that may have been provided to them by their school or by their school district. The first stat that you'll see up here is a stat that is reflected in a lot of the media. It focuses on different access levels by race or ethnicity. And the whites, 74% are much more likely to have home broadband than blacks, 54%, or Hispanics at 53%. That emphasizes that this is a bit misleading. Race and ethnicity, and even the cultures therein, do not really contribute to an access gap. These happen to fall out this way because of the alignment of the access gap to educational level for the head of household and to income level. So race and ethnicity here is not the driver. This is more of an economic and education problem. On the side, you can see how pronounced this is. In households where the head of household is a college graduate, 89% of those households have broadband at home. Where to the other end of the spectrum, where the head of household does not have a high school diploma, only 37% have broadband in the home. So there's a difference there, just looking at the educational attainment of the parents or the parents within the household. If we look at economics, you also see a pretty big disparity there. So broadband penetration among high earners, and really we're saying household income of at least $75,000, so that's middle income, is 88%. Whereas down to those families that have a household income of under $30,000, considered income families, their access level is only 54%. So that's a 30% or 30+% difference in access. 54% of the under 30,000, that means we have 36% that don't. So another aspect here that Kajeet has seen, all the data we just cited came from the Pew Research Center's Internet and American Life project. So you can look that up in additional data that's available from them as well. So additional things that Kajeet has seen in our work is that this isn't really just about home. So a lot of the mediation and even the dialogue within the education enterprise is around, we need access in the classroom and access to the campus, and then student access in the home. However, we've really found working with schools and working with parents and families that it's just about school or home. Many of the same students that do not have access at home also don't go directly home from school. Especially when you look into disadvantaged families where both parents might be working, or it's a single-parent family and that single parent is working. There may not be anybody at home, and so students may be engaged in extracurricular activities, school care programs. They may actually be working their own job in the afternoon or evening, or they may go stay with a family member or a friend. They can go home later on. During this time, they're essentially mobile, and don't have, home broadband wouldn't help them. So the need for a student's computing device, which is increasingly mobile, whether it's a laptop, a tablet, or a smartphone, the need for that device to be connected is really an anytime, anywhere type of need. The digital divide that I'd like to touch on has to do with culture. Yeah, that students at a certain age are considered digital natives. It's a very popular term. It can be a bit misleading when we think of it as, just youth of America are digital natives and the older, retirees are not. When in fact, digital natives, by definition, are people who have grown up with access to technology and who have grown up in a society where that expectation is really throughout their experience. But if their kids are acquiring their digital citizenship skills, that really comes over time as they are exposed and used on access and digital devices. If the adult digital access adoption or literacy are low, then consider in those families may actually rely much more on peers or public services such as schools and libraries and community programs to acquire these types of digital citizenship skills. If they have a device of their own or they're lacking broad access, those students can fall behind rather quickly. The impact on education can be quite pronounced. If a student is caught in that digital divide, then get further and further in their educational career, they will be further and further behind. Examples here, again from the Project Tomorrow Speak Up findings, 40% of sixth grade students use internet weekly or daily for homework. That number grows sharply to 69% that are using it weekly or daily by senior year of high school. So you can imagine if you're not accustomed to this type of behavior early in your school career, and you're going to acquire these skills as you move through, you're going to become further and further behind your peers. It will have increasing impact on student achievement as all of our assessments move online, more resources move online. Students' online access becomes a big factor in their progress through the school system. Just a little bit of time talking about assessing the digital divide within your school or within your school district. Ways that you can do this. The easiest ways is to participate in Project Tomorrow's National Speak Up Survey. Project is a nonprofit, and they conduct this survey every fall, and in fact the survey window is open right now from October through December of this year. School or your district can choose to participate, going out and promoting this to your families and your students. And participate as a school or a district. All data that comes back from this survey is available to you, so you know exactly what the responses look like in your individual school or in your district. There's listed here on this slide, so you can go to speakupforschools.org and access this survey and learn how you can participate. And note that if you are participating, you need to promote this out to your community and for people who don't have access to be able to complete the survey at school using school resources, school computers, or using paper surveys. School, district, or PTA surveys. What we have found is really critical is to make sure that a survey that you conduct yourself is statistically representative using a random sampling. We've kind of voluntary opt-in surveys do not have these characteristics, and the data that comes out of those surveys can be quite skewed. When we say statistically representative, this means that within your population of students, you sample of those students. You don't have to survey every student. You just need to survey a certain sample size to be representative of students across grade levels, across the geography of your district, and across the income levels within your district as well. Is to make sure that you're getting simply opt-in responses which may bias the rest of your survey, but identify through a random mechanism who the students are that you need to survey or who the families are you need to survey. You need to chase down those survey respondents. When you are unable to get responses from participants in your survey, be careful not to just replace those with people who want to respond, because again, it could skew the results. You really get the best response possible from everyone within your randomly chosen statistically representative sample. You also have to be very careful about the types of questions that you ask. All be subject to interpretation by your survey respondents. So if you were to ask on your survey, does your family have access to the internet? That can be interpreted in a wide number of ways. Family may answer yes because they have a broadband connection in the home. Another family may answer yes because they can get online at their local library or at the McDonald's down the street. A family may answer yes simply because they know their student has access at school. So you need to really think about the way you're structuring your questions. Like when you ask about access to devices, computing devices in the home, you need to understand whether it's a shared computing resource between many family members or whether it's a personal computing resource for the individual student, and understand a little bit more about what kind of a device that is. Is it a laptop, a tablet, a smartphone? I have a family who actually responds, the student has access to a computing device and access to the internet simply because that student has a 4-year-old smartphone device that was handed down to them by a family member. That really meets needs of school district's educational resources. Here, one school district that we worked with, which is generally considered to be an affluent district by their 93% of their survey respondents say that they had access. At the aggregate level, this could lead the district to conclude that the digital divide in their district is only a 7% problem in their population. So I'd just like to point about that. When you dug into the survey responses, while you get a 7% gap at the district level, there were individual schools where the response was as low as 54%, meaning 46% of the students in those schools didn't have access. So that even within your district, there could be different levels of access and equity between depending on many factors. Because this was a large district, as I mentioned, even a 7% number, while it sounds small when you say 7%, represents around 10,000 students. That's a pretty big number. Another example that I wanted to bring up is from a similar district, the very high penetration rate for devices and broadband access. And we spoke with leadership at one particular school was very affluent even within that district. And those classes, we had a great story that came to us from one of the teachers in that class. They had one student in their class who had no device and had no access. And school provided that student with a device and with off-campus broadband access, a huge difference to that student. And it had to do with the assumptions that they make about access among their students. In a disadvantaged school, teachers would be more reluctant to assign online assignments, and therefore the impact of lacking access may not be as pronounced. In this particular class, since truly everyone in the school did have devices and access, it was very common practice to assign online resources and research projects to the students. That the lack of access was even more pronounced for that one single student. So they're moving towards digital content, and they're moving towards devices for every student. This change of anytime, anywhere broadband access is really growing as we see these resources adopted. Whether it's the student or parent portal, the management system, the course management system, textbooks, or applications and websites that are being used for course supplemental instruction, or whether or summative assessments that are being done online, the students who lack this kind of access are at a greater disadvantage than they were just a couple of years ago, and that disadvantage is actually growing as the adoption of these resources grow. So internet access, we also need access in school and home. Here on this slide is from the 2012 report of the State Education Technology Directors Association called the Broadband Imperative. And in the report, they talk a lot about why anywhere access is important and why access out of school is important. You can see the quote here, which I'll read. Out of school access to broadband by students and teachers is now arguably as important to the overall quality of the student learning experience as access at school. Statement to come from all of the state education technology directors. And then school, home broadband adoption rates have all stalled since 2009, left at 65%. What they're there is that we had a period prior to 2009 when broadband access in the home was growing fairly rapidly. And we've really seen the growth of broadband access adoption by families slow down. Because we've reached certain economic barriers and certain other barriers to adoption, that's causing the persistent, what we would consider the persistent divide, to be harder to broach. And that is something that, unfortunately, schools really can't tolerate when they're trying to create equity among students using digital resources. And off campus really does enable a number of major benefits. Higher utilization rates for school and district investments in educational resources, systems or devices that they may have invested in. More opportunity for assessment tools that help teachers customize and personalize the learning experience for kids. Digital literacy and increased 21st century skill development. These are skills that are obviously very difficult to assess, but they are the skills that employers are increasingly saying are necessary for the global workforce moving forward. Skill communication, collaboration are becoming more and more important. Collaborate with their peers, with their teachers, and even with experts in various fields around the world. Higher when they are able to get online outside of school. Additional access to virtual learning environments. Many school districts and individual schools now have online learning opportunities that allow students to either catch up in the case of remedial programs or supplemental programs. And those programs can only be accessed if students are able to get online from off campus. Encourage the investment the district has made in curriculum, its educators, its investment in deploying devices to students, those investments through campus access to really drive the success of students. So talking about what doing to address the campus broadband access gap, so the access equity component that we discussed earlier. A solution called the Smart Spot. So let's talk about what the Smart Spot is doing. As education is moving online, the pace of moving online a bigger and bigger challenge for schools to make sure all students have equal access to sources and that families have access to communicate with the schools via online mechanisms. That extends to every student having a device, what we commonly think of as one-to-one. Strategies by which schools and districts are achieving one-to-one. The ones include bring your own device programs, where they have their own smartphones, tablets, laptops, etc., and they're allowed to bring into the educational environment and use their own devices. Programs where the school or the district provides the device to the family, and loan programs where you check out computers or tablets on a periodic or an extended loan basis. Strategy, devices that are across a variety of different operating systems. These include Chrome OS, such as Chromebooks, Android, Apple iOS, and Windows platforms. And no matter what the device form factor, phone, tablet, laptop, no matter the operating system, there is one common standard that has emerged across all of these devices, and that is access via Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is the connectivity standard of today. So take advantage of that common standard to really provide access to education broadband for all students. The Smart Spot is very simple. It is a portable Wi-Fi hotspot. While schools have invested significant resources in building out on-campus enterprise Wi-Fi to students when at school and in the classroom, the now is how do we extend Wi-Fi access to SIPA-compliant education broadband off campus. And as students go home or students are moving about the community, some of them have access and some of them do not. The Smart Spot really fills in that gap and connects the rest of the students to SIPA-compliant broadband access. The Smart Spot is a simple portable Wi-Fi hotspot. It looks like the other Wi-Fi hotspot. Connect to it and they get online. Is all in the network itself. The policies are embedded within the network path. So if students access the internet, all access is being managed by the school's policy. And that policy can be customized for students all the way down to individual students. So it can have different policies for its elementary school students, its high school students, a specific academic program, a virtual education program, or other group or individual policy they wish. Then get blocked from going to inappropriate non-educational websites, and that includes some biggest bandwidth hogs out there as well. So like consumer streaming media, Hulu, Netflix, Pandora, Spotify, these also happen to be the sites that consume most bandwidth today. Access to those consumer streaming media sites and other consumer activities and focus the access we're providing to students from the school on educational use, we see dramatically lower bandwidth requirements. Student access that goes through the Smart Spot is through this common network path. It allows Kajeet to provide a wealth of data and reporting to schools and school districts. Now, big data, and you see on this slide, we're using the term big data. And what is that? Well, I'll give you an example. In public schools, where we worked with their 5th grade program, roughly 120 students were equipped with tablets with one off-campus broadband access provided by Kajeet. Just period, among those students, 120 students, million data records were generated. This is data. So what's that data? Well, it helps distill that down into reports. You where students are going, what time of day they're accessing different websites, and to then use that information to drive real decisions. Some of the decisions would be invested in particular online resources. How are they getting used? How many students are accessing them? What times, what days? Are they being used for a single month out of the year because it's to a specific educational content area or lesson plan? Or is it something that really gets used by all students all year long? That information can help to drive decisions on whether that investment was a good decision, bad decision, or should negotiate with that vendor differently over the type of pricing that's being extended to you. Level, or even down into the individual classroom, a teacher can go in to look at what action students are taking online. So if a teacher sees different performance levels from one student to another student, he or she asks, what are they doing differently? Do they do their research differently? I want to go look at the types of Google searches that runs online and what their research strategies are. More time or less time online? More time on educational resources that the teacher provided to them, or going out and finding their own educational resources that they may have been aware of, but might start being creative and locating on their own. All of this can be teased out of the data that comes from Kajeet's reporting. The major difference with Kajeet is our business model. We believe that the business model for providing broadband access to students needs to be aligned to the budgetary structure of our schools, our districts, and requirements that go along with that. And traditional method for mobile broadband access for major carriers in rate plans, where you pay $40, $50 a month, and you get some fixed amount of data each month. Very well, and doesn't account for the differences that are between students in the ways that they access and use the internet. Monthly rate plans. The base purchase from Kajeet is done in the aggregate. So if you have students that you wanted to provide access to, you may decide you need several types of data to provide access to those students throughout the entire school year. That bandwidth would be yours forever until it is actually used per your policy by authorized users for a task activity that is reported back to you. So if this go unused, for example, if a device is being checked out to a student and then gets checked back in and sits on the media center shelf for 3 months, that device will incur no cost. We in addition to no expiration of bandwidth, we no overages, and the policies themselves help prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. So you need the ability to buy exactly the amount of bandwidth that you forecast you'll need for students across the year. And heavy and light users will tend to balance each other out. And the data will be yours forever until it's used in a way that is accountable back to you by the policy. Technology enhancements and this business model, we've been able to bring the cost of mobile broadband down by about 60% from major carriers, and to the average cost of mobile broadband by the FCC's Learn to Go program under E-rate. Presentation on the Kajeet Smart Spot, and I do want to turn it over to Q&A now. Lauren on the phone with us, who is from Kajeet and who has been helping to compile questions that have shown up in chat. So Lauren, can you tell me what kind of questions we're getting?
Yes, it looks like we have a few questions coming in over the course of the meeting. The first question is, what schools or districts are using your service today?
That's a great question. There's obviously many of them. I'll give you some examples across different categories. So in large school districts, districts both urban as well as suburban, wealthy, and more economically challenged. So some examples of those: Chicago Public Schools works with Kajeet, Fairfax County Public Schools works with us, Detroit Public Schools works with us. Just some examples across a variety of economic levels. The mid-sized tier, some examples there would be Forsyth County Schools, who is leader nationwide in BYOD programs, recognize that even with an extensive BYOD program, there were still students who had a persistent equity issue with access to the internet off campus. Baxter County Schools in Texas would be another one in that mid-sized category. And if we go down to the individual school level, we've even worked with some private schools. And one example of that would be the Haverford School, which is a private boys preparatory school in Pennsylvania.
One of the other questions that came in is your service eligible for E-rate funding?
And I definitely want to be clear about how the E-rate use mobile broadband connectivity. Start, broadband is categorized as an eligible Priority 1 service. Your students would be eligible users, and the school, as an accredited school or school district, you'd be an eligible entity. However, one of the criteria for eligibility for E-rate subsidies is eligible location clause under the program. E-rate defines an eligible location as on the school campus. So using the Kajeet Smart Spot on the school campus, it would be E-rate eligible. We mostly see our solution used to address off-campus access. It would not be E-rate eligible.
Okay, one of the other questions was, any of the districts that you've provided solutions to come up with any innovative ways to generate funding for this type of program?
Yeah, we've certainly seen a number of different methods used by districts. Some of them do fund it out of their general budget. A number of our customers have specific grant programs that they're funding for. The reporting that we provide can be very useful because we can give them a real accountability back to their funding source. I think creative funding sources that I've seen so far is in Forsyth County Schools, which I mentioned earlier. Their BOD program has been very successful and very well received by their community. And in fact, the PTA and the business community in Forsyth County have really gotten behind that district effort. They organized, not the district, but the community themselves, organized charity golf tournaments and raised a significant amount of funds for the district to buy smart spots and address the off-campus equity issue. Forsyth really did help. Forsyth didn't organize it, but Forsyth did help organize the community by creating a digital equity task force. We invited community leaders to participate on that task force and be able to present those community leaders with insight about the size and scope of this problem and how it's impacting kids. And that really motivated the community to get on this effort.
Okay, and I think our last question here is, what can some of the outcome or data reporting show in the way of student success?
We've seen students' increased access really change the way that they learn. I'll give you an interesting example of that. In Chicago, where we were working with their 5th grade students, a unit that they did every year on Alaska. And under their traditional textbook-based instruction, Alaska would have really focused on a couple of paragraphs in the textbook about the state of Alaska. So all of the students in the class would present a consistent picture of what Alaska was and the diversity in those perspectives. If you have the enterprising student, maybe they go and do further research on their own in the library. When we did that same unit, as the students were all equipped with devices and internet access, on their own, went out and researched and accessed over 35 different websites through Alaska, and actually saw different activity by different types of students. So a student who's more data-oriented would go to the U.S. Census Bureau and pull down information about demographics and statistics and economic levels and things like that. Who is more visually oriented or artistically inclined would pull down, pictures of wild photography or scenery and nature. Even like the state flag would be more, to them. So different perspectives that were being developed. What they did, because they now had this diversity of perspectives, for the students to present their findings to their peers. Now you had all of the students in the class receive different perspectives on the same topic from peers that would not have gone out and researched on their own, and that certainly would not have been in the couple of paragraphs they used to have in their textbook. That's pretty significant. We've seen in our work with schools that online access impact on student engagement levels pronounced. We saw significant impact on parental and engagement levels of our deployments, and those things are drivers in terms of student active performance as well.
Michael, that was it. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
Absolutely, for helping facilitate those. Information is here on this last slide, but you can also just go to kajeet.com/education, and there you'll find more resources about us as well as what we're doing in the educational system.